My name is Carolyn Merritt. I'm 41 years old. On the night of our 15th wedding anniversary, my husband stood up in a restaurant full of our closest friends and family, raised a crystal glass of champagne and said, "To my one and only, the woman who makes every day worth living. 15 years with you, Laura, and I'd choose you 1,000 times over." My name is not Laura. I sat across from him at that candlelit table in a white dress I had bought 3 weeks earlier, wearing the pearl earrings he gave me on our 10th anniversary, and I did not flinch. I did not cry. I did not look around the table to measure who had noticed. I simply raised my own glass, smiled, and let the moment breathe. What none of the 22 people in that private dining room knew, not my mother-in-law seated 2 chairs to my left, not my best friend Dana, who had flown in from Portland, not my husband's business partner who had given the most enthusiastic toast of the evening, was that the small Bluetooth speaker I had placed inside the decorative centerpiece floral arrangement 45 minutes before anyone arrived was still connected to my phone, and that my phone, sitting in my purse on the chair beside me, held 4 months of audio recordings from the dashcam I had installed in my husband's car in February. He had toasted to his one and only. I had come prepared to introduce her to the room. This is that story. To understand what brought me to that restaurant with a speaker hidden in a flower arrangement, you have to understand what 15 years with Douglas Merritt actually looked like. Not the version he performed for dinner parties, and not the version I told myself during the years when I was still pretending the cracks weren't there. Douglas and I met when I was 25 and he was 28. He was a civil engineer at a mid-sized firm in Columbus, Ohio. I was finishing my master's degree in landscape architecture at Ohio State. We met at a mutual friend's housewarming party in Clintonville, and he spent 40 minutes talking to me about the sightlines of a poorly designed outdoor kitchen before I realized I was being charmed. He was smart, deliberate, attentive in the way that men are when they have decided they want something. I found that quality compelling. I would later find it exhausting. We married in June, 11 years after the housing market crash had taught Douglas that security was everything. We bought a house in Worthington. 4 bedrooms, good school district, finished basement. I opened a small landscape architecture studio on 5th Avenue when our daughter Nora was 3. Douglas continued rising at the firm, eventually becoming a senior project manager. On paper, we were a success story, the kind of couple people cite at dinner parties when they want to make a point about what commitment looks like. What commitment actually looked like inside the walls of our house on Ridgemont Lane was something different. Douglas had a gift for making you feel like your perspective was a minor inconvenience. Not through cruelty. He was never cruel in the traditional sense. He was precise. When I raised a concern, he would listen with his arms crossed and then offer a 3-point rebuttal, so measured and thorough that by the end of it I was apologizing for having the concern in the first place. The first time I noticed the pattern, Nora was 4. I had asked him to come home by 6:30 on a Thursday so I could take a client call without interruption. He arrived at 8:12. When I said I was frustrated, he said very calmly, "You knew what my schedule was like when you married me. Landscape architecture was your choice. The client expectations you've created for yourself are your responsibility." I stood in the kitchen holding a cold plate of pasta and decided he was right. That was the first of many times I made that mistake. The second example I want you to understand happened at our 10th anniversary dinner, just the 2 of us at a restaurant in the Short North neighborhood. He ordered my wine for me without asking. I mentioned it lightly. He put down his menu and said, "You always order the same thing, Carolyn." I was being efficient. When I said that wasn't the point, he smiled and said, "I think you're looking for something to be unhappy about tonight." I spent the rest of dinner convincing myself he was probably right. By our 12th year of marriage, I had stopped raising concerns almost entirely. Not because I had run out of them, but because the architecture of our relationship had been designed, very precisely, very deliberately, to make my concerns feel like character defects. I was too sensitive. I expected too much. I didn't appreciate what I had. Douglas was a man who could make you feel unreasonable for wanting to be heard, and he did it with the vocabulary of a reasonable man. That is the specific kind of damage that takes years to name. In January of the year I am telling you about, I found a receipt in the pocket of Douglas's dry cleaning. It was from the Pearl, a hotel in downtown Columbus. One night, January 9th, a Tuesday, Douglas had told me he was in Cincinnati for a site inspection that Tuesday and had stayed over because of weather. The receipt was for room service, 2 glasses of wine. 2 entrees. I stood in the laundry room for 7 minutes, holding that receipt and looking at the wall. Then, I folded it and put it in the zippered inside pocket of my winter coat. I did not confront him. I had spent 12 years watching what happened when I brought concerns to Douglas. I already knew the outcome. He would reframe it. He would find a plausible explanation, deliver it with calm authority, and I would end up feeling foolish for having suspected anything. What I needed was not a confrontation. What I needed was documentation. In February, I bought a dashcam, not the kind that faces the road, the kind that faces inside the car, a small device, lens no larger than a button, designed to clip onto a sun visor and record everything inside the vehicle. I ordered it from an electronics retailer in a browser I had never used before, paid with a gift card I bought in cash at a Walgreens on the other side of town, and installed it on a Saturday morning when Douglas was at the gym. The camera was connected to a cloud account he did not know existed. Everything it recorded, every conversation, every phone call played through the car's Bluetooth, every voice note Douglas dictated to himself on his commute, uploaded automatically. I did not listen to the recordings obsessively. I let them accumulate. I told myself I might find nothing. I told myself finding nothing would be the relief I was waiting for. For the first 3 weeks, there was nothing unusual. Traffic sounds, sports radio, occasional calls with his business partner, Marcus Webb, about project timelines and materials budgets. Normal, ordinary, marital white noise. Then, on March 4th, at 6:18 in the evening, his phone connected to the car Bluetooth and he took a call before he had even pulled out of the parking garage at his office. The contact name came through the car's display as simply L. I heard her voice before I heard his. She said, "Are you on your way?" And he said, 15 minutes. "Tell me you already ordered." And she laughed and said, "You know I always wait for you." And Douglas said in a voice I had not heard him use in longer than I could remember, "Easy, warm, unguarded. That's why I keep you around." I sat in the parking lot of my studio at 7:45 that evening, long after everyone had gone home, listening to 6 seconds of audio on a loop. Not because I needed to hear it again, because I was deciding what kind of woman I was going to be on the other side of this information. I did not cry. I did not call my best friend Dana. I opened a new note on my phone and I typed, March 4th. 6:18 p.m. Call with L. Duration 9 minutes, 42 seconds. Hotel receipt, January 9th. And then I went home and made dinner and asked Douglas how his day was and listened to him talk about a drainage issue on a commercial site in Westerville. And I thought, I need more. What followed was 4 months of documentation so precise it would have made my landscape architecture professors proud. By March, I had identified L as a woman named Laura Hensley, 34 years old, a marketing consultant whose firm shared an office floor with Douglas's company. I found her through the car recordings. She mentioned her boss by name on March 17th, and from there, it was 4 minutes of professional searching to find the firm's website and her photograph. By April, I had 41 separate recordings. By May, 67. The relationship was not casual. Laura was not a mistake that happened once. She had her own nickname for Douglas. She called him D. He called her his one and only. That phrase, his one and only, appeared in the recordings 9 times between March and June. I also spent those 4 months doing something else, something quieter, something Douglas would never have imagined because he had always believed I was more emotionally driven than strategically capable. I met with a family law attorney named Patricia Holloway, whose office was in Dublin, Ohio. far enough from Worthington that I was confident no one who knew us would see my car in her parking lot. I met with Patricia 4 times. I learned everything there was to know about Ohio marital property law, asset division, and the relevance of documented infidelity in divorce proceedings. Patricia was 53, silver-haired, and had the kind of unhurried precision in her speech that told you she had seen every version of this situation and had never once been surprised. In our second meeting, she said to me, "The most important thing right now is that you don't tip your hand. Build the record, then we move." I told her I intended to. She looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Good. Because women who move quietly tend to end up in better positions than women who move loudly." I thought about Douglas reframing my concerns across 15 years of dinner tables. I thought, he has no idea what I've become in this room. I also began, very quietly, separating my finances. My landscape architecture studio had always maintained a separate business account. In April, I began paying myself a slightly different amount each month and transferring the remainder to a savings account in my name only at a credit union I had opened in March. The amounts were not dramatic, never enough to trigger a pattern anyone would notice on a casual glance, but over 4 months the account held $47,000 that was, legally and practically, mine alone. I also took inventory of every asset, the house on Ridgemont Lane, which we owned jointly, Douglas's retirement accounts, my own business assets, the investment portfolio we had built together over 15 years. I gave Patricia copies of everything. She had a very organized file. I was not going into this negotiation uninformed. And through all of it, through every quiet dinner and every weekend with Nora and every ordinary Tuesday where I packed his lunch and kissed him goodbye, Douglas Merritt had absolutely no idea that the woman he had been managing for 15 years had stopped being managed. Our anniversary was July 14th. Douglas had made the reservation himself, which I thought was telling. The restaurant was Sycamore, a private dining space in German Village that we had been to once before, on our 10th anniversary. He booked the private room. He invited 22 people. He coordinated with the restaurant on the menu. He sent handwritten notes to both sets of parents. Douglas, when he was performing, performed thoroughly. I spent 3 weeks preparing for that evening. Not my dress, not my hair, not the seating chart he had asked me to finalize. I spent 3 weeks building the audio edit. I took the most relevant recordings from the dashcam, 11 separate conversations between Douglas and Laura Hensley from March through June, and I arranged them into a sequence that told a story. Not out of order, not manipulated. Just presented cleanly, one after another, so that anyone listening could follow the narrative from beginning to end. The sequence ran 14 minutes and 37 seconds. It began with the March 4th call, "Are you on your way?" 15 minutes. "That's why I keep you around." And it ended with a conversation from June 22nd, recorded in the parking garage of the Pearl Hotel, in which Douglas said, in a voice entirely his own, "She won't find out. She's not the type to look." And Laura said, "She sounds sweet." And Douglas said, "She is. That's the thing about Carolyn. She trusts completely. It's the most useful thing about her." I listened to those 2 sentences every evening for 2 weeks. Not to make myself angry. I was past anger. I listened because I wanted to make sure I remembered precisely and without sentiment why I was doing what I was doing and how I intended to feel when I did it. The Bluetooth speaker I had chosen was small enough to be completely hidden inside the centerpiece floral arrangement, a cascade of white hydrangeas and ivory roses in a tall mercury glass vase. I had designed the arrangement myself and delivered it to the restaurant at 3 in the afternoon on July 14th, telling the events coordinator it was a personal touch from the couple. She had set it at the center of the head table without a second glance. I connected the speaker to my phone and confirmed the signal from the parking lot before any guests arrived. Douglas greeted me in the restaurant lobby at 6:45. He was in a navy suit. He smelled like the cologne I had given him last Christmas. He kissed me on the cheek and said, "You look beautiful tonight." I thanked him. I meant it about the dress, if not the source. The evening proceeded the way Douglas had designed it. Drinks, appetizers, the warm, private light of a beautifully managed dining room. Our friends were happy to be there. Our parents were sentimental. Dana caught my eye across the table at one point and mouthed, "You okay?" Because Dana has always had the particular gift of sensing when I am holding something. I smiled and nodded. She let it go. At 7:58, Douglas stood. He tapped his glass. The room quieted. He was good at this, at commanding attention, at filling space with composure. He looked around the table with the expression of a man who had rehearsed just enough to seem unrehearsed. He said, 15 years ago, I made the best decision of my life." He paused for effect. "To my one and only, the woman who makes every day worth living. 15 years with you, Laura, and I'd choose you 1,000 times over." The room went very still, but not for the reason Douglas intended. A breath was held. Someone's fork made a small sound against a plate. I watched his face in the half-second it took him to register what he had said, the name that had been living in his head for 4 months, finding its way into his mouth. I watched his jaw tighten. I watched him glance at me. I raised my glass. I smiled, the way you smile when you already know the ending of a story. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "That's so lovely." He blinked. He tried to recover, said something about a slip of the tongue, called me my Carolyn with a laugh that didn't quite land, and the room laughed lightly with him because people always follow the host's cue at a dinner party. My mother-in-law placed her hand on her chest. Dana's expression had changed completely. She was watching me the way a person watches a chess player who has just moved a piece that doesn't seem significant yet. I waited 4 minutes. I let the applause from the toast settle. I let the server pour a second round of champagne. I let Douglas's shoulders relax back into place. Then I reached into my purse and I pressed play. The speaker, sitting 12 inches from Douglas's water glass inside the white hydrangea arrangement, filled the room with a very clear, very unmistakable sound. His voice. Her voice. The date and time of each conversation spoken in my own voice before each recording, clear as a news bulletin. March 4th, 6:18 p.m. Are you on your way? 15 minutes. That's why I keep you around. March 17th, 8:44 p.m. I already miss you. I know. Tuesday. I'll be there by 7. April 2nd, 12:51 p.m. Do you think about what it would look like if things were different? Every day. But for now, this is what we have. April 29th, 7:09 p.m. She doesn't know. She won't find out. She's not the type to look. The room did not erupt. It went the way a room goes when something has happened that no one has a script for. Glasses stopped moving. Conversations stopped mid-syllable. I watched the faces around the table the way you watch faces when you have prepared yourself to watch them. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had gone completely still, both hands flat on the table. My father, seated at the far end, put down his fork slowly and looked at Douglas with an expression I had never seen on him before. Dana had her hand over her mouth, but her eyes were steady and she was looking at me, not at Douglas. Douglas stood up. He said, "Carolyn," my actual name, correctly, in a voice that was no longer composed. He looked at the centerpiece. He looked at the table. He looked at me. I sat with my champagne glass in my hand and I did not look away from him. "Turn it off," he said. Quietly at first. I let the recording continue. May 19th, 9:23 p.m. Tell me again. You're the one I want. You've always been the one. Say my name, Laura. Only Laura. Carolyn. His voice cracked at the edge. Please. I set down my champagne glass. I reached into my purse. I paused the recording. The room was so silent that the sound of the speaker cutting off seemed almost loud. 22 people looked at me. I looked at Douglas. "I believe you meant to say Carolyn," I said, "but it's all right. You said the name that matters quite a few times, as it turns out. Marcus Webb, Douglas's business partner, pushed back his chair and left the room without a word. My mother-in-law picked up her napkin from her lap and set it on the table with the careful deliberateness of someone who does not trust their own hands. My father, my retired, quietly furious father, said in a voice that carried the full length of the private dining room, "Douglas." Just the name. Nothing else. But Douglas heard everything that was in it. I stood. I did not rush. I picked up my purse. I touched Dana's shoulder as I passed her. She grabbed my hand for 1 second and squeezed it once, and I kept moving toward the door. Behind me, I heard Douglas's voice saying my name, the right one, twice more. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I walked through the door of the private dining room, through the main dining area of Sycamore, past the host stand, through the heavy glass doors, and into the July evening air on Schiller Street in German Village. I sat on a bench on the sidewalk for 6 minutes. The air was warm and the street was quiet, and somewhere down the block someone was watering their front garden. I looked at my phone. Patricia Holloway had received the email I had set on a timer 3 hours earlier, a full summary of the documentation, the recordings, and an instruction to proceed. My studio had a project deadline in 9 days that I had already prepared my team to handle. I had not scheduled anything for the next 2 weeks. I had left space. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I had anticipated something, relief or grief, or even the particular satisfaction of watching something fall. What I felt instead was quiet, not peaceful, not victorious, just quiet. The kind that arrives when a thing that has been held for a very long time is finally set down. If you are watching this right now and you recognize the particular exhaustion of spending years making your concerns smaller so someone else can feel more comfortable, drop a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Because what comes next is not the part I planned for. It is the part that taught me the most. In the days that followed, Douglas tried several approaches. On the night of the anniversary, he sent 12 text messages between 9:14 p.m. and 1:06 a.m. I had gone to stay with Dana, who had driven directly from the restaurant to pick me up without being asked. I read each message once. They followed a progression I would have recognized anywhere after 15 years with this man. First, the explanation, "I can explain everything, it isn't what it sounds like." Then, the reframe, "You had no right to do that in front of our families." Then, the appeal to my character, "I know you're not someone who would blow up a marriage over a misunderstanding." And finally, the vulnerability he deployed only when the first 3 had failed. "I'm scared. Please just come home." I responded to none of them that night. I sat on Dana's couch in Portland. She had been visiting Columbus for the anniversary and extended her stay by 5 days without being asked. Because that is the kind of friend Dana is, and I allowed myself to feel exactly what I felt without narrating it for anyone. What I felt was grief, clear and specific, not for Douglas as he was, but for the version of this marriage I had spent 15 years constructing in my head, the one where the cracks meant something was being repaired, not that something was being concealed. Grieving a fiction is its own particular kind of loss, and it deserves its own particular kind of room. On the second day, Douglas called Patricia Holloway's office, apparently having found her name somewhere in my personal files. Patricia called me at 11:43 a.m. to let me know. She told me calmly and without drama that she had informed him she was unable to discuss my affairs with him and suggested he retain his own counsel. She said, "He sounded surprised that you had someone." I told her I had spent 4 months making sure I would not walk into this unprepared. She said, "I noticed." Douglas hired a divorce attorney named Craig Sutter, who had an office on High Street and a reputation for aggressive asset negotiation. I know this because Marcus Webb, the business partner who had walked out of the restaurant without a word, called me on the 3rd day. We had known each other for 9 years. He said, "I want you to know that I had no idea, and I want you to know that I think Douglas is making a mistake in how he's approaching this." I thanked him. Then he said he told Craig Sutter that the recordings were illegally obtained. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, Marcus, I am not an attorney, but I would encourage Douglas to look up Ohio's one-party consent statute before his attorney builds a strategy around that position. Marcus was quiet. Then he said, I'll pass that along. He did not call again, but he did send a handwritten card 2 weeks later that said simply, Take care of yourself, Carolyn. You always deserved better. I put it on my kitchen windowsill. The proceedings that followed were not dramatic. Douglas's attorney made several attempts to challenge the documentation and to characterize my financial preparations over the preceding months as bad faith behavior. Patricia addressed each attempt with the patience of someone who had spent 30 years in this room. Ohio is an equitable distribution state, which means assets built during a marriage are divided based on what is fair and documented infidelity. While not automatically dispositive, is relevant context for a judge evaluating fairness. The dashcam recordings were admissible. The financial records were complete. The $47,000 in my separate account were, legally, mine. Douglas's attorney eventually advised him that proceeding to trial would cost him more than settlement. We settled in 9 months. I kept the house on Ridgemont Lane for 2 years, long enough for Nora to finish middle school without having to change schools. Then I sold it and used a portion of the proceeds to buy a smaller house with a garden. A real one, designed the way I would have designed it from the beginning if anyone had ever asked what I wanted. My studio grew in the year following the divorce, not because of any dramatic transformation, but because I had energy available that had previously been spent on being managed. I used it to take on 3 clients I had turned down in the previous 2 years because I had not trusted myself to expand. All 3 projects won regional awards. I do not mention this with pride, so much as with the specific satisfaction of a person who spent 12 years being told she was too emotionally driven to be strategically capable, and then discovered that she was, in fact, quite good at strategy when she was not spending her resources managing someone else's comfort. Nora is 13 now. She knows that her father and I are divorced. She does not know the specifics of the anniversary dinner. That is not a story I will tell her until she is old enough to hold it without it changing the wrong things in her. What she does know is that I never missed a school event, that I never talked about her father with bitterness in front of her, and that when she asked me last November if I was happy, I was able to tell her honestly that I was getting there, and that getting there was a perfectly dignified place to be. Douglas remarried 11 months after our divorce was finalized. Not Laura Hensley. That relationship, as far as I have been able to determine from the ordinary channels of a small city, ended sometime in the fall of the year we separated. He married a woman named Christine, who is 37 and works in commercial real estate. I have not met her. I wish her the specific kind of luck that comes from going in with clear eyes. My mother-in-law Eleanor called me 6 weeks after the anniversary dinner. She was 71 and had been married to Gerald Merritt for 43 years, and she called me from her landline on a Tuesday afternoon. She said, I owe you an apology for the years I looked past things I should have said something about. I told her she did not owe me anything. She said, I know I don't. That's why it means something that I'm saying it. We have lunch twice a year now. She is a remarkable woman. She always was. I just didn't have the room to notice before. There is something I want to say directly to you, because some of you watching this have been in a room like mine, not the restaurant, but the other one. The one inside a relationship where you have been made to feel that your perceptions are the problem, where you have spent years editing yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger, where you have mistaken someone's ability to stay calm for wisdom and their ability to make you doubt yourself for intelligence. It is not intelligence. It is a particular kind of control, and it is very effective against people who are generous enough to assume the best. The fact that it worked on you does not mean you were weak. It means you were trusting. Those are not the same thing, and do not let anyone, especially not a voice in your own head, confuse them. What I want you to take from this story is not the satisfaction of the speaker in the flower arrangement, though I understand why that is the part that feels good to hear. What I want you to take is this. I moved quietly for 4 months because I had to. But I also moved precisely because I had spent 15 years learning exactly how Douglas Merritt operated, and I used that knowledge. The person who underestimates you is often giving you the most useful gift they can give because they will not see you coming. Build your record. Know your rights. Find your Patricia Holloway. And do not explain yourself in advance to anyone who has already decided who you are. You do not owe anyone an argument. You owe yourself a plan. If you have ever walked out a door and felt more like yourself on the other side of it than you did inside, tell me in the comments. What did that moment feel like for you? What were the first 3 things you did that were purely, unambiguously for yourself? I am genuinely asking, because the answers to those questions in the comments of videos like this one are the things I find most useful, more useful than the story, more useful than the revenge. The actual accounting of how women rebuild, that is the part worth documenting. That July, on a Saturday morning 2 weeks after I had moved into the smaller house with the garden, I planted a row of white hydrangeas along the back fence. Same variety as the centerpiece from the anniversary dinner. I did it on purpose. Not as a monument to that evening, but because they are genuinely beautiful flowers, and I had always wanted them, and I had never planted them because I was not sure Douglas would like them. It turned out to be irrelevant whether he liked them or not. They bloom every summer now, along that back fence, without asking permission from anyone. And to everyone who has listened to this story from wherever you are watching in the world, thank you. It takes something to sit with a story like this one. It takes something to let it land in the particular place where you have your own version of it. I see you doing that, and I do not take it lightly. You give this channel its reason for existing, and every comment, every subscription, every share is a woman somewhere saying, I heard this, and it helped me, and I passed it on. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole point. We will be here tomorrow with another story, same time, same quiet power. Subscribe so you do not miss it, and bring someone with you who needs to hear this as much as you did.